Hi class, this is Mr. Tan, and today we are looking at understanding and leading change. And we are in the beautiful city of Berlin. We're in a place, or I'm in a hotel called Rent 24, which has a different concept. I'm on the roof terrace. I'm on the roof terrace overlooking the city of Berlin. So I'm delivering today P1, and P1 in understanding and leading change says to compare different organizational examples where there has been an impact of change on an organizational strategy and operation. So compare is a key word, and compare means to look for the similarities or differences in terms of their strategy and effect on its operations. So when we're looking at this company, we first have to really think about what is strategy. And there are many different authors who talks about strategy in general, from a general perspective and also from a wide perspective. If we look at Chandler, 1962, he talks about the determination of long-term goals and objectives. Long-term goals and objectives with the allocation of resources to achieve these long-term goals and objectives. If we look at Andrew's 1971, Andrew talks about a pattern of major objectives, purposes or goals, and essential policies and plans to actually achieve these objectives, aims and objectives and goals. So both Andrew and Chandler's are talking about the same type of thing in terms of having aims, objectives and long-term goals, and the aims and objectives meeting these long-term goals. And it's the allocation and the plan and how they use the company's resources to achieve these. We can look at Mintzberg. Mintzberg talks about the 5 P's of strategy. Mintzberg talks about the plan, deploy, the pattern, the position and the perspective. And even Miles and Snow, 1992, talk about different typologies of business ventures, and they talk about 4 types of strategies that organizations tend to adopt. They talk about the prospector. The prospector is an innovative company who has decentralization policies and allows staff to be creative to achieve their aims and objectives, to come up with new products in existing markets, new products in new markets, or to sell existing products into new markets. So they allow, for creative thinking and for the development of new products, regardless of what market it's for. You have the defender. The defender, if we take the example of Big Pen, where they are defending their market position. So they're not really expanding or coming up with new products, but there's a tight control of resources to defend and focus on their cash cow, their market position, to incrementally develop it as they go along as best they can, but to defend their market share in their current marketplace. And then you have the analyzer. The analyzer is more of a defender and also part prospector in terms of trying to come up with new products for new areas, but as well as maintaining their market share. If we look at Procter & Gamble, for instance, Procter & Gamble maintains their market share in the detergent market in most of the retail chains, but then they come up with new products to extend their range and new products into different markets as well. Then there is also the reactor. Reactor really doesn't take into consideration the market environment and really reacts to situations, and sometimes can react to situations quite late. If we look at IH, International Harvester, we can see that International Harvester in the 70s was one of the, a large organization with many different businesses, many different areas, and they didn't take into consideration what was happening in the marketplace in terms of increased competition, in terms of the recession in the marketplace, and what happened to consumer spending. Subsequently, IH was, in the 70s, the biggest company were the biggest loss ever in the history of all businesses. So simply because they weren't taking into consideration what was happening in the market environment and what was happening elsewhere. So to begin with this question, you need to look at, you need to explain what is strategy. You need to give some definitions of what strategy is. And different authors in terms of Chandler, in terms of Andrew 1971, and even in terms of Miles and Snow 1992. Once you've talked about, what is strategy, you need to now talk about what operations are. Well, operations can be seen as input, and then within the organization itself, the resources that come into the company, it's a transformation process of those inputs in terms of the processes and how business actually conducted within the organization, and then the outputs to get the end product. But on the outside, you also have environmental factors for an open system. If you're talking about a closed system is where the outside environmental factors don't really have an effect on the company itself. So now you talk about the operations and what actually happens in the operations and how things are actually conducted. You've got various operational tactics like total quality management, like continuous improvement at different levels. You have lean, and you have all sorts of management techniques within. Taylor's scientific approach, adopting a scientific approach, analysing the process and the practice of how work should be done to get the maximum output. So again, you then move on to what is operation. So now in the question you've covered, strategy and operation. But then the question says to compare two different organisations. So the next thing you need to do really is to then compare, two organisations. One organisation we're using is Tesco's. So in Tesco's, you can talk about what's happening in the environmental in terms of SWOT and PESTEL, but we don't want to go too much into SWOT and PESTEL now because we cover SWOT and PESTEL in the next question in P2. But we need to mention some changes that's happening to Tesco's. Well, some changes are increased competition from Lidl and from Aldi coming into the UK, meaning that consumers are now seeing cheaper prices and switching from Tesco's to Lidl, or shopping at both Lidl's and Tesco. Especially since we have consumer wages have not increased, and yet the rate of inflation has increased faster than people's wages have been increasing, which means that people have less money in their pockets to spend. So people have to be more careful. We've seen petrol go up from £1 to £1.40, 40% increase. We've seen electricity bills go up 8%, 9%. By electricity companies. We've seen train prices go up 4-5%. All over the place, costs are actually going up, which means that people are actually being more competitive. How has this affected Tesco's? Well, this has affected Tesco's because we've seen them cutting down on costs. On terms of 32 major distribution centres they have in the UK, they now decided to cut down to 30, to close down 2 huge distribution centres to cut costs and to merge operations. We've seen Tesco's now, buying Booker's. We've seen Tesco's with a pre-tax loss of 6.4 billion in 2015. So, Tesco's bought Booker's, and with Booker's they have access to over 30,000 independent shops that buy from Booker's, and also Booker's had under their umbrella Londis, and Londis, Tesco's can now sell their products into Londis, and then Londis can now compete with Lidl and Aldi. But they're not so widespread, but to a degree they can compete. And since 2015 and 2016-17, we've seen Tesco's increase their pre-tax profits, unlike 2015, where there was a 6.4 billion pre-tax loss. So how does this affect the operations? Well, it's going to affect the operations in terms of change, in terms of transformational change, in terms of having the right leadership to adopt the right change in Tesco's, to merge departments and to merge employees, to merge the operation of Booker's and Londis into the operation of Tesco's. How does that all work? How is that going to be merged? There are different cultures between Londis and Booker's and Tesco's, and so that needs to be merged. And if you don't merge these things, and if you don't merge it successfully, then you're going to get unsuccessful, you're going to get conflict and unsuccessful meeting of objectives. If we take McDonald's, for instance, McDonald's have been, facing changes in terms of consumer preferences, in terms of what consumers want, in terms of healthy eating. We've seen a fall in McDonald's sales because people are moving away and there's a lot more alternatives. So McDonald's have to either increase their prices, which they haven't really done, or to make their processes and their practices more efficient in order to save costs and therefore reduce the administration costs in the income statement, and therefore increase their overall net profit if their customers are falling. So in one way, what they've done, as we've seen in the McDonald's stores, is they brought in the computerized, and they reorganized how customers are served. They've reorganized it in terms of tailored scientific approach. So you go into the McDonald's store, you order your food. The